today.
That's why we are here.
Yes. This is on everybody's mind, the whole Corona situation. But maybe we could apply design thinking to find a way through this. I don't know. Let's see in this session. Let's get creative here. um, the topic of this particular session here is design thinking, right? And being going through a sprint like we do right now, I think design thinking is a super interesting topic to remind each other about, and what design thinking really can do for us, and how we can best apply design thinking. So and as he Crystal is not on the call, but she has kindly arranged this session with us. So thank you, Crystal, for bringing us all back together here. And Lance, as you can tell, this is kind of a family, our online family, with our real families close to us in these days of social separation. But now we have this virtual family also to stay close to and discuss what's on our mind. But let's switch to design thinking, and to kind of guide us into this conversation. We have these amazing community members here with Lance Peppler and Carol Wong, who both volunteered to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Lance, and thank you so much, Carol, for being here with us today.
Great.
And I think so. This is a really core part of our virtual family. So we all know each other pretty well, and we meet each other pretty much every day online. Lance, you are, I'm sure, well known to most on this call, but maybe not to everybody yet. But I want to change that. So Lance Peppler will be known by everybody. At least in my family, and then we can work on the rest out there. So Lance, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hi everybody. You saw my little daughter. I'm here. They're going to be at home for a while with me. So I'm married and got 2 children. I worked at a multinational IT company for 14 years and just left at the beginning of February to do exponential consulting and those kind of services with my company IdeaStorm. While I was working for Oracle, I started to do something called journey mapping, customer journey mapping. And customer journey mapping has got design thinking elements into it. You analyze a business process, and you try and identify areas of improvement. And so I started looking at design thinking then. And I identified, like probably everyone on this call knows, like IDEA is the sort of grandfather of design thinking, originated in the 2000s. And so I studied their process. I did a few virtual design thinking workshops with a company called Acumen Plus, which is a great organization. And then I did some courses through Darden Business School or the University of Virginia, which is Jean Litka. And she's got a slightly different design thinking process to IDEA. So that's my exposure to design thinking. And I'm sure everyone knows about that. And if you don't, I can take you through it briefly. As far as OpenEXO goes and the exponential, I've done like the consultant, just finished the coaching certification now 2 weeks ago. I just scraped through. Yeah, I know. Just scraped through. I think Yaroslav just felt sorry for me, so he gave me the certificate. Which has got, and obviously you guys know that the sprint has got quite a few elements of design thinking, from ideation to research to different elements of design thinking in the sprint process. So that's me, Lars, and everybody.
That's a little bit about Lance.
Yeah.
Yes, and everybody should sign up for Lance's podcast, by the way,
You
about
must, you must.
you must,
It's
absolutely.
it's called Exponential Organizations with a S instead of a Z. So they're organizations. So yeah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant podcast.
It is a brilliant podcast, especially one episode I remember, but
Oh
no,
yeah, no, that one is brilliant.
they are all good. Yes.
Actually, this week's one interviewed Pascal Fenez. I don't know if you know him, Lars.
Yes, I know him
Yeah.
quite
So
well. Worked with
that's a
him.
really cool episode. Actually, it was a good one.
I can't
Anyway.
wait to catch up on that. Yeah,
That
excellent.
was amazing.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Welcome aboard, Lance. We also hello, John. Your timing is perfect, sir. Simply, we're just doing a round of brief introductions here. Lance Peppler went first, and maybe you want to go next, John. Introduce yourself to our awesome community here. You're muted, by the way, if that's not the intention. Let me just unmute you. I helped you. I've unmuted you now.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is John. I'm in South Africa and I teach entrepreneurship. I look after the entrepreneurship faculty at our business school. And we teach some students from impoverished communities. We get sponsorships and we put them through an undergrad degree in business administration. And the entrepreneurship is one of their two majors that they do. And I've met Jabin before. I don't know if you recall Jabin. We had some discussions a while ago.
Of course, yeah.
The others on YouTube.
Hi, John.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome aboard, John. Looking forward to your take on design thinking as well. And this is a very interactive event where everybody chips in and asks questions, and we have a chat going on the side that everybody can join and ask questions and throw in comments. So we like to keep things super informal here, and most of us know each other very well. And the rest are going to. There's no way to escape us, and we are safe. We are online, and all is good for now, right here. Also, we have Carol, and most here know Carol very well. I think Carol is involved in everything I've heard about in the EXO world right now, without exceptions, including this panel. So maybe Carol, your introduction would be maybe more around what's your relation to design thinking. How are you connected to design thinking?
Okay. Back in 2012, I was working for a government agency. That is, the agency is called Malaysia Innovation Agency under the Prime Minister Office. During that time, we were looking at how we can transform our education in terms of providing our fresh graduates, undergraduates with additional skills, additional knowledge to get them to be more creative and have critical thinking skill. Because we at that time felt that in the higher education system, we tend to be very specialized, and there was no opportunity to allow for cross-discipline collaboration and working on real world projects. So therefore, at that time, we went to look for programs that could supplement our higher education qualification. That's when I visited Stanford D School back in 2012. At Stanford D School at that time, I found out that school was actually sponsored by HPI, Hassel-Plattner Institute. HPI, Hassel-Plattner is one of the co-founders of SAP. If you're familiar with SAP, one of the largest ERP systems in the world. So we went to Germany, Potsdam, and reached out to Hassel-Plattner Institute School of Design Thinking, HPI School of Design Thinking, and get them to help us to develop a program that we can implement for the government, where our intent was to allow fresh graduates who graduated to be selected. They can apply for the program, and they will go through a 10 weeks, not a full-time program, a 10 weeks program on design thinking. That's how we introduced design thinking, and I helped the government to set up the first design thinking school. And then after that, I also went to Stanford D School again to approach Perry and Jeremy, the two executive trainer for design thinking boot camp, and got them to come to Malaysia to conduct boot camp catered for the corporates executive. Of course, they have to pay for it. So the government have sponsored for a couple of years all Malaysian fresh graduates, as long as or working professionals below 35 years old, they apply, they can go through a 10-week program with the design thinking school that we set up. And subsequently, the government has also sponsored a majority of the government servants to participate in the program. So the intent at that time, we hope that with design thinking, discipline and processes, our people will be much more effective at work. That means when they go to work, they can apply some of these skills to innovate products and services. I like to believe that because of what we have done since 2012, we have actually created a lot of knowledge about design thinking. A lot of the corporates started to have innovation department adopting design thinking methodology as a way to innovate products and services. So in Malaysia, Malaysian corporates are no longer new to design thinking. They have also, in fact, one of the corporates and university invited the Stanford D School professor to come to Malaysia to teach them further to become trainers as well. So since then, we have actually created a lot of change in Malaysia. And of course, we hope that we could see more innovation as a result of this. That was my experience. And I continue to do this now. And when I was participating in EXO Sprint, I find it very, very useful because I was able to apply what I know of design thinking as well. Yeah.
Yes, there's, as Lance mentioned in the beginning, there are quite a few elements of design thinking in the EXO Sprint, so that's a great opportunity. That's a great introduction to your deep connection with design thinking, Carol. If we just continue a little bit more on that before we switch back to the gentleman here on the panel as well. So this was like 8 years ago that you were part of introducing design thinking in Malaysia. Yeah. How has that adoption rate been? Is that something that spreads easily? Does it get adopted easily? Or
Yes. I like to say that in the past 5 years, the adoption rate has increased tremendously as well, especially when we saw a lot of new disruptive startup like Grab, the Uber equivalent in Southeast Asia, and fintech business. All these startups, actually, a lot of them adopt design thinking as the way to work. Even though, especially those young startups, right, they tend to believe this is one of the way to quickly iterate their products and services. So many corporates have also, especially the large corporates, have also started up their own innovation department that adopt design thinking as well. In fact, when in terms of the number of people have been trained or have gone through the 10 weeks program, when I think we have deployed about a few thousand, and these few thousand went back to their organization, continue to train others. So it actually has multiplied a lot. But what I see, unfortunately, especially with the government, because before I left this agency, we have already trained more than 3,000 government servants, but we didn't see them able to apply it very, very well. So one of the key challenge that we always, when we train these people, one of the key challenge we always tell them, you come for the training, you learn the skill. When firstly, you need to apply on yourself. We always believe it because design thinking is not just about the process. It's also about the mindset and the values. So if you could apply it on yourself and then you applied it with your team, and then if you could see some results, other teams will be curious to know what you have done. So the impact may not be seen in the first year. So it could be seen over time. And of course, during our time, during our early period of setting up the design thinking school in Malaysia, we have also generated a number of, I would say, new startup entrepreneurs who first came to our course with no intention of starting up their business, but because of the process they have gone through. Because design thinking emphasizes a lot on human emotional needs. So some of these students, after they've gone through the process, they were very inspired on certain specific problem. And they continue on to iterate their ideas, and some of them actually set up their own business. In fact, one of the students also mentioned she wished that she has learned design thinking earlier before she started her own business. Because she was sharing one example. You know how we always develop system in the past, the waterfall method, we have to document the specification and requirement before we start developing the system.
Yes.
She then found out that design thinking actually allowed her to do it in a much more agile manner. She could have just done a very simple prototype, a wireframe. Then she can iterate from there. So this is, without wasting too much time, like documenting for 3 months before start developing the system. So those were some of the experience that are very, very inspiring to us. At least, we found that it has benefited either individually, new startup entrepreneurs, as well as corporates. When we see them setting up their own innovation department using design thinking. Yeah.
Wow. So design thinking leads to entrepreneurship. It inspires. It gives people the mindset and some skill sets and some inspiration to actually go and start new businesses. That's excellent. And that is clearly one of the personal traits and skill sets that we want the coming generations to acquire, isn't it, for the future of education. Very interesting. I could now I'm very keen to hear Lance and John if you're seeing something similar in South Africa or elsewhere where you are operating.
I personally am a bit intimidated now because Carol's an expert at design thinking. I don't know if you need me and John on the call, unless John's an expert as well. But design thinking is widely adopted in South Africa. So we've got, John knows in Cape Town there's the D Design School that happens in Cape Town. That's from the Stanford University, and then the different institutions in Johannesburg that teach design thinking. And then it's pretty common in most of the banks, telcos use design thinking. So I think it's quite a well-adopted methodology that is used. There's meetups around design thinking in Joburg that I've attended, about 5 or 6 of them. So, there's quite a few jobs. If you go onto Indeed.com, you can find design thinking jobs in South Africa that are advertised, etc. So it's not a new methodology, but obviously there's companies that specialize in design thinking all across South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, etc. So I don't know what you think, John, but I think it's pretty standard in South Africa in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is, but I think the South African economy is also sort of split between those that are the fintechs and the banking, etc., and the sort of more advanced companies are engaging with design thinking. And in Cape Town, we've got a very strong startup community, tech-focused community, which uses it quite a lot. But then we've still got all those industrial pipeline businesses, and a lot of them are sitting, you know, a bit behind the curve, and are the ones probably that need it the most, really. So there's sort of those two sectors of society or business here that find it challenging.
What are the yeah? Over to you, Carol.
Yeah, in fact, I want to share, right, in a number of banks. In fact, one of the banks in Singapore, they actually have dedicated department design thinking. That department use design thinking to innovate the bank products and services. So a Singapore bank, a leading Singapore bank, and Malaysia banks as well, a number of banks. In fact, the Malaysian banks, one of them, they even hire people who have experience in design thinking, leading some of the innovation within the bank. Because if you are familiar with design thinking, right, one thing for sure, we focus a lot on customer real needs, customer journey mapping. All these understanding of customer needs, right, require a lot of empathy discussion and empathy interviews and all that. And one of the foundation of design thinking is our ability to listen with empathy and observe with empathy and engage with empathy. So those elements of really understanding about the user or the customer, the people that you want to design for, are very, very important. And I find that, you know, to be honest, I find that sometimes empathy needs practice. Sometimes quite difficult to be taught. You may be doing it, you know, as a way, you know, like a checklist, but sometimes you can't do it because, and therefore, when we teach or when we train people on design thinking, I find that is a challenge. Yeah. If you don't listen well, when you come back to synthesize the information, you may interpret wrongly. That's all. But of course, there's no right or wrong answer. We have opportunity to iterate. So that's how we can continue to improve on it. Jabin, you want to say something?
Jabin wanted to. Are you muted?
As each of you were speaking, I was thinking of our experience at Fast Track Institute, where obviously, as part of the process, we you know, some of our process stages and phases are based on design thinking, and one of the first phases of the team stage of the Fast Track process, the teams actually come into the city, into the local context, and spend time with doing a lot of field visits. We set up meetings with different key stakeholders, and they're encouraged to go out into the city, meet with people, and you know, just talk and develop multiple customer personas, etc. And going through this process not only gives them this specific an understanding of the various perspectives and trying to get it right, as you described, Carol. But it also helped us to iterate our process and emphasize different parts of the different interactions, because Fast Track operates in a very multi-stakeholder environment. And this is one of the, I mean, I want to tie it back to John, why we started speaking to John after Africa Tech Week last year, is to try out a new variation of the Fast Track process with entrepreneurs and business schools, and hooking them up with experts from the EXO ecosystem and take them through this process. And, you know, it's just, I think it's an amazing, what we saw, the final thing I'll say is that the participants on the teams, and especially the local team members, would start to get engaged and actually start to build ownership in the solution, which is exactly what we want.
Absolutely. In fact, I want to add, when we were running the program, the design thinking program, we engaged the government departments a lot, because we always get the government departments and the agency to pose a real problem of a public issue.
Yes.
In fact, we
Yes.
train 200 police officers using design thinking to solve police related problem. That means like the public safety, how to bring down crime, how to ensure community safety, how to get public will to engage with the police. So those were some of the projects that we have done. Yeah, using design thinking.
I have a question for Carol. You know, my former company actually also had a team of people who were supposed to focus on design thinking. They are supposed to be the people going around to help departments if they had problems. And we even developed toolkits and stuff like that that actually got innovation awards. But we never really were able to develop a oh, you're showing it. That's it, right? I said, whoa. So that's the toolkit. So, but it's so hard to actually really get, you know, the culture, because
Absolutely.
yeah, you have any words of wisdom over there?
Yeah, I know. Okay, I know that some big companies have design thinking department doing this and that, and the major challenge is the culture. So what we in fact, one design thinking practitioner who is in one of this large company, I think in Hong Kong, he in fact say that if he can convert 10% of the workforce to have this design thinking mindset and culture, is really good enough, because it's very, very difficult to get everyone to embrace this kind of mindset and values. So when we talk about mindset and values, what are those mindset and values? Very important. Compassion and listen with empathy. Empathize with others. Promote team collaboration. Collaborative learning, collaborative teaming, which some organizations are very silo. So this is also one culture need to be changed. And, you know, suspend judgment, not to kill ideas. You know, some bosses, you know, some department, before you say anything, they kill the idea. So all these elements and values, right? In fact, I have recommended to one of my clients to incorporate these values as part of the company values or the competencies. Somehow develop specific program to get the people to adopt some of these value or have the skills. Because design thinking doesn't mean that you have to like solve a problem, then you use the processes. There are techniques and tools and methods and values that you can mix and match, and you can, you know, like the way I conduct a meeting, I use some of the values when I conduct a meeting. That is applying some of the values of design thinking, or the way I prepare my report. So it doesn't mean that you use the entire process to solve a problem or develop a product or services. You can use some of the techniques to help you to improve the way you work with the team. So this is something that I would suggest to clients to actually incorporate some of these elements as part of the way of working in the organization. Of course, culture is very difficult to change overnight. But if you can implement some of these elements, right, I would feel is considered small successes, small wins to celebrate. Yeah. Do I answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's a very tough nut to crack. The thing is, I was hearing you say that this bank had a design thinking department, and I was thinking, actually to have a department on its own may be able to help you tackle one or two transactional, like one or two hacks or sprints, but how do you actually make sure that the entire organization embraces, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is more important. That's more important.
If I
The idea is
can,
we want everyone to embrace and do it. I better
Over
say.
to you, Lance.
if I can say something there, Carmen, I've worked in IT my whole life, and it always seems like computer systems don't make an impact in companies, even from like the 1990s to the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, etc. But the fact is that if they didn't keep up with technology, then they would fall behind. And you can see examples of companies that have fallen behind, while it seems like companies that do okay or well just seem to be the same as they've always been, in a way. And I think it could apply to design thinking as well. And if you're putting design thinking in, and then we as humans sort of don't realize that it's there or making an impact, and we think we're just the same as everybody else, and we're the same boat, and all banks are the same. But I think actually probably does make a big difference. So it probably does make a difference in how you create your products and services and do your offerings and put together your solutions. Except the other organizations are also doing it, so it doesn't seem to make a difference. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I've always seen it in computer systems. Like, what difference does a new computer system make? Actually, a lot, but it doesn't seem to make any difference whatsoever.
It doesn't make any difference, maybe. John, I'm curious to hear your opinion on. We are hearing how some organizations they have specialized trained people in departments to deploy design thinking. How do you see the future in training people for design thinking? Is that the way they should do it?
I think, and I'm not sure what the other panel members, the experience with design thinking, whether that includes lean startup or not in the broader discussion, because that's a factor. Throughout time, you have these consulting workshops or strategy workshops or whatever, which is kind of where they invite you initially to come to your DT work. And mostly those strategy workshops, there's good ideas, but what kind of happens after there's a problem in terms of the implementation, where it starts hitting cultural barriers, which we've already noted, as well as just straightforward implementation barriers. People just don't know how to implement, yeah? And so the intersection between design thinking, lean startup, agile methods, action plans, et cetera, for me is still a bit diverse and perhaps not packaged. And I'm sure that some of the programs like the EXO stuff, et cetera, have sort of thought about that, but I'm not sure that it's a universal understanding yet. I think design thinking, even if you just Google it, you can get to more or less the same kind of information. But that's more just for coming up with the ideas initially, and implementation, I think, remains quite a big thing. And when we speak of a team in a corporate, design thinking team, and I don't know how they're structured, but for those of you that have been in the consulting world, you'll know that if you're on a project, if you don't have EXCO actively involved in that project, it's very difficult to execute. You hit silo barriers and et cetera. So I just wonder to what degree, if one proposes to a company that, we set up a design thinking project, that one has to make sure that it's populated, across that are willing to connect,
Yeah, I think, John, you're right. I think, unfortunately, what I have encountered so far is that people take one concept, one idea, and in fact, it's not just the company that's siloed, but sometimes these ideas are siloed. And as as Carol already pointed out as well, in order to actually do well, in a high change environment, you basically need a lot of basic qualities or values within the company, which is agility. You need to have collaboration. You need to have accountability, all of those things. And unfortunately, I think in many, well, at least in this part of Asia, and I think, Carol, you also mentioned Hong Kong, and in Thailand, a lot of these ideas are just great ideas, but they are not married together.
It worries me for South Africa because of our economy and our structure of our employment profiles, etc. So the large majority of people are not exposed to these ideas or thoughts at all. There's a lot of unemployed people, etc. And so as I see them coming through to my classrooms, they have no idea of these concepts whatsoever. They have limited access to technology, etc., etc. So whilst there is design thinking in our companies, in our corporates, if one takes the entire population, then one sees that perhaps it's not such a large amount. And so that does worry me a bit. And the empathy, design thinking relies on empathy. There's a massive gap in empathy in our country between the haves and the have-nots, and the employed and the unemployed, and so forth. It's huge.
Not just your country.
Both ways. There's a really very little understanding of each other's worldviews and life experiences, which presents, of course, an opportunity for design thinking to really be deep and personal, but the gap is quite large, and we need to start, doing stuff about that.
I just want to jump in and also say, like, listening to you all, I think that design thinking needs to be a guiding principle for how we operate in life. Just like holistic thinking, just like sustainability, it can't be an add-on. It has to be integrated throughout everything. And with design thinking, the importance is amplified by the fact that you can influence so much downstream by looking at the design, which is why I come back to biomimicry. It's like it should be a given that we teach this to everybody at a young age, and think about how you design your world from that kind of orientation.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem that happens in the implementation. It's an add-on. It's not part of and they're not doing the life cycle thinking and the value, looking at the full value chain. They're trying to solve a narrow siloed problem. And they haven't even defined what that problem really is that they're looking at. What are the system boundaries? How is it experienced? Like, what are we trying to solve? Anyway. It's a lot. There's a lot to think about.
So if I may jump in here, it begs the question then, what educations already exist that offer all of these things already and have been there for a very long time and that we're maybe not seeing? Or some of us are seeing, because they're there. And I think that the guiding principle, so nicely stated by Jabin, to help govern this and to create, is in part to create the framework and the understanding, the structure. Is as a foundation, just as is the UN Global Compact's 10 agreements for the 17 SDGs. It helps to structure for us. But what education is it that's been offered millions of years, well, maybe not millions of years, but for as long as, back to, anyway, what is that education that that creates that without them realizing even the structure within that they're creating? Because it's just a part of their living. It's just the way of being in the world.
I definitely think, like Jabin says, it has to be part of everything, right? Weaved into not only business but life in general, right? After all, I think some of the guiding principles are about being human-centered and biased towards action and radical collaboration and these things. And then we seem to have a massive gap on empathy and probably a number of other important traits and skill sets in our countries. So how do we do this? How do we make design thinking connect to the empathy that may or may not be there, and how do that help? How do we turn this into the new normal, or in particular in the education systems? I think where it all starts for the younger generations.
If I can just say something quickly. In South Africa, there are schools now that are incorporating design thinking into their syllabus. I'm thinking like Nova Pioneer. There are quite a few schools that are doing that, and I think it's absolutely essential if this group here is designing and thinking about a new way of learning and how schools, how education is done, that the experimentation or the experiential learning, I think that's what it's called, and design thinking seems to me a key ingredient in every kind of educating our children. I definitely would like, so my children are 5 and 7, and when they're in high school, at least in South Africa, so 13 and above, I'd love them to be doing design thinking on a fairly constant basis, and definitely be studying it using projects at school, etc. So I'm hoping this group here, this really great group, can come up with solutions to incorporate design thinking into your offerings, if that's what you're doing.
Jan?
So at our business school, it started sort of a dozen odd years ago. The founders made the entrepreneurship faculty, which I run, and then what they call the leadership and self-development faculty, another major. And in that LSD faculty, it's all about personal development. So the students do, right through their three-year degree, they do a range of personal development across the curriculum, all experiential. So, if we're teaching them Johari's window, it's not just theory, they actually go through the exercise, they go through personality profiles, and they go to the wilderness for 7 days. They spend 2 nights on their own in the mountains, and an incredible amount of self-discovery work. And so there's a lot of empathy that happens in that course, across the 3 years. And when they exit the degree, the self-development course is always on top of their list of the most important things that have happened to them in their life. And I sort of follow in a long distant second place kind of thing. So it's pretty powerful. And I think it was never envisaged as part of design thinking because that concept didn't really exist in the minds of the founders at the time. But it really is the real heart of design thinking, getting to someone's self-awareness and who they are and what their purpose is in life, etc. And I wonder to some degree how the DT field is addressing that personal journey rather than my business purpose, if you understand what I mean, and investigating how we attract people or just approach people's personal journeys and then find ways to connect it within their business purpose, because that has far, far more impact. You know, when you do some exercise of that form with someone and that light turns, it has a huge impact, you know.
I would say the MTP tries to address that. Maybe even more emphasis on the personal MTP. There's the personal, and during the sprint, people are taught to think about their personal MTP, but then the focus shifts quickly to the MTP of the initiatives. Right.
Yeah, actually, I want to share, right, in my opinion, when a lot of clients ask, you know, we have design thinking, we have lean startup, we have business model canvas, we have all these different methodology, you know, solve problem, and then, you know, system thinking. My advice to the client always is, all these are just tools and techniques. So if you are, you know, learn from it and see how you can mix and match. It doesn't matter if, in fact, you have design thinking process in your company, but you didn't call it design thinking. But maybe after learning, and then say, hey, actually, that is how I solve problem. I said, that is good. Take it that you're learning new techniques, new way of looking at the problem, new way of synthesizing information. So we don't really bother whether you want to call it design thinking or you call it something else. The issue is, when you solve a problem, you must always look at from the user perspective. And how do you want to understand that? And just take it the different techniques and you can come up with your own process. That's in order not to be confused by all the jargon, all the terminology and all that. So that's what I always advise them. Just take it. In fact, some client will even say, you know, this MIT come out with another method of, I forgot the name. It's some name of, like, it's something like design thinking as well. I say, I'm sure they are very good at it, but whatever it is, just learn whatever you know and you can mix and match to solve a problem. That's what I always say. Makes sense?
Exactly.
Um,
For me,
everybody,
for me,
I'm
listening.
sorry to interrupt, but I just need to go and join Francisco Palau's
Yes,
call now.
we'll
I don't
wrap
know if you
in the
guys are
next
doing
minute.
that.
Yeah,
we're
we'll
all
wrap
You
in
can
a
do that.
minute.
All right,
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So in closing here, why don't we each give a recommendation to those who are going through a sprint right now in Educate for Life, creating new initiatives for the future of education. Lance already said, you know, you should teach design thinking, right? But so what is an important step to consider when we design new types of education for the future? How can we weave design thinking into this? Is there a closing suggestion from everybody?
I'll say something, Lars.
Yes, Jabin.
Especially in relation to what Carol just mentioned about, you know, focus on the user's perspective and design from the user. I think that's really, really critical, but it's maybe just one of the first critical stages. I think it's also important to go beyond that and think about not just the user, not just the design phase, but everybody else that could be impacted or could impact your process, product, system, curriculum, whatever. Unless we do that, life cycle thinking and value chain thinking, we risk having these unintended and unforeseen consequences. So that's why I consider design thinking a guiding principle rather than like, you know, this is
The answer
it.
to
This is
everything.
all we have to, yeah.
Yeah.
Technique.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, in a sense, the terminology is important. I guess the really what's important is the shared understanding and the need to distinguish between what is a tool versus a guiding principle versus something that's overarching all of that. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that's
But in fact, a lot of people don't like the term design thinking.
you are right, Carmen. Some people say it's like oversold.
I come from hospitality. I think we focus on the customer probably 99.9% of the time, unless you want to collect a deposit. But the thing is, we never use the term design thinking. Why is it design thinking? It's customer thinking. So, you know, in a way, yeah, I think the term is sometimes very confusing. It confuses people.
Any closing comment from you, John? Any recommendation to the rest of us?
No, thank you. Thank you to everyone for the participation. I appreciate the time as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today, John, and contributing. Great insight.
Great to see you again, John.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Catch up.
We need to wrap, so thank you, Carol, John, Lance, and the rest of you for the session today. It's been wonderful. Good luck out there, and see you soon. Be safe. See you soon. Bye, everybody.